So, the first sneak peek of Chapter 32 of Two Blue Vortex has come out. And per usual with these sneak peeks, it appears as though this chapter is from relatively early on in Chapter 32, as the page depicts Eida floating out of her house with Daemon on her back, trying to draw the attention of Mamushi. But what does all of this mean? What is Eida presenting herself to Mamushi going to do to Konoha? Is Mamushi gonna split to the point where he becomes a complete and total idiot? Will Daemon be able to repel all of the forces of Mamushi while protecting his sister? Or will it be up to Boruto or Kawaki to blast away the entire horde with a giant, wide-sweeping attack? And if either of them do blow away the entire horde of Mamushis, what's gonna happen to Eida, who will most definitely be at the center of that horde? Well, today I'm going to try to answer those questions and a whole lot more, because today we're talking Eida and Daemon will die. But before we get to talking about the death of two cyborgs like a Dance Gavin Dance song, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you're looking for one additional NC Hammer 23 video every single week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reaction series using the fourth wall link in my description below. Neji versus Naruto is wrapped, and we are on to Temari versus Shikamaru. But before we get into all that, I want to talk to you about the sponsor of today's episode, IVRX. I'm sure all of you have heard about these things called GLP-1s recently. I know I have. I have tons of friends who are currently flying through their weight loss journeys with the help of GLP-1s, but what are they? Are they the miracle medicine that everybody's seemingly using to shortcut through their weight loss journey? But GLP-1s aren't a miracle. They're a tool. See, yes, they support your weight loss journey by helping regulate your blood sugar and your appetite, but they are not magical solutions. Results vary, and success is still dependent on consistency, lifestyle habits, and medical appropriateness. And that's why medical guidance matters. See, GLP-1s are prescription medicine, and IVRX emphasizes proper screening, proper oversight, and ongoing support, not self-experimentation or trend following. See, access to GLP-1s shouldn't be confusing or intimidating, because many people are interested in GLP-1s but don't know where to start. But IVRX simplifies this issue by offering online intake and evaluation, licensed provider review, ongoing care and check-ins, and medication that's shipped directly to the patient. So what are you waiting for? Use my link at enroll.ivrx.com/NCHammer or use promo code NCHammer to get $100 off your first order on 1, 3, or 6-month plans. It's time to kickstart that weight loss journey with IVRX. So, like I said, the sneak peek that we got from Chapter 32 depicts Eida using her ability to fly to lift herself out of her and Daemon's home and presumably expose her location to Mamushi, and use the exposing of her location to possibly draw Mamushi outside of population centers of Konoha. See, because even though Eida and Daemon live on the outskirts of Konoha to begin with, in what is effectively the Hollywood Hills section of Konoha, I'd assume that both Eida and Daemon don't want their house destroyed, and therefore Eida's most likely going to use her ability to fly to draw Mamushi into all of the empty hills behind her. Now, unfortunately, however, for Eida, her flight isn't exactly going to allow her to flee Mamushi, because Mamushi, even though he's not often shown using it, also has the ability to fly. In actuality, it's actually probably a bad idea for Eida to be flying when Mamushi finds her, as not only can Daemon not fly, but the ground also serves as a really good way to block a potential axis of an attack that Mamushi wouldn't have access to if Eida was on the ground. Now, rather interestingly, well, I can't say for certain who's narrating during this sneak peek. It seems as though, based off the tone of voice that's being used to talk about Daemon, that the person who's narrating is either Mamushi or Shikamaru. See, because specifically what's said during the sneak peek in reference to Daemon is he's the guardian who protects Eida. His superhuman strength is limitless. He's a devilish bastard. Now, obviously, you can make the argument that anybody would call Daemon a devilish bastard, but considering the fact that it's going to have to be Mamushi who fights against Daemon, to me it makes the most sense that it's Mamushi saying that Daemon is a devilish bastard. But if it is Mamushi, that brings up an interesting talking point. See, because Mamushi was made from Bug, and Bug not only served Eida and Daemon before he was turned into a Shinju, but also had a sordid past with Daemon specifically, as Daemon tormented Bug. And while Bug was the only person in the car hideout not dumb enough to try to attack Daemon, that doesn't mean that Daemon didn't terrorize him. And therefore, if anybody was going to be aware of not only how strong Daemon was, but also how much of a devilish bastard he was, it would stand to reason that it would be a Shinju created from Bug. But for Mamushi to have specific memories about Daemon is kind of a new piece of information when it comes to the Shinju. See, because, while yes, of course, we've seen that the Shinju are affected by their past lives, as obviously the Shinju are solely motivated by the fact that they want to consume the people that they loved the most when they were still human. To have specific memories about people from their life when they were human is kind of a new wrinkle. And that's an important development on account of the fact that it could mean that Hidari could potentially remember not only Sarada, but also more likely than not, Boruto. See, we've seen Hidari being incredibly confused, basically anytime he's ever shown. He doesn't remember who he was, why he's able to use things like Chidori, why Chidori gives him tunnel vision, and so on and so forth. He's really shown the least amount of emotion from any of the Shinju. But if Bug is able to not only remember Daemon's name, but also aspects about Daemon's personality and his strength, there's really no reason for us to assume that the same thing couldn't affect Hidari, which could lead to a hypothetically interesting situation down the line. Anyways, let's move on to our predictions of chapter 31. But before we do, it is important to note that only one other person over the course of Two Blue Vortex has ever been referred to as having limitless strength, and that was Boruto when he revealed his Rasengan Uzehiko. But that brings us to the question of the hour. Can Daemon's limitless strength defend Eida? Well, if I'm being honest, no. Probably not. See, let's go over how Daemon's reflectability actually works. See, Daemon, like all of the other cyborgs, got an infusion from Shibai's cells, and thus the Shinjutsu he awoke to was the reflectability, an ability that allows for him to turn his opponent's attacks back against them, even without his intent or awareness. So even if while Daemon was asleep, I snuck up over his bed and was about to stab him to death, the second in my mind I expressed the intent to attack Daemon, that intent would be reflected back onto me. And the severity of how hard that attack kicks back on me scales to how severe my killing intent for Daemon was. If Daemon makes some kind of wisecrack and I go, why Ayada, I'll get a little slap on the face. However, if I truly intended on killing this cyborg child while he slept, I would probably die myself. And thus this ability seems pretty infallible, right? How are you supposed to hit somebody who's technically unhittable? Well, people have theorized about how to get around Daemon's reflect for a long time now. What happens if you attack the landscape around Daemon and the rocks from the landscape take him out? What happens if you aim behind Daemon? What happens if you aim at somebody else and Daemon jumps in front of the beam? Well, unfortunately, we can't say. However, and I believe it was chapter 60 or so, we do see Code after unlocking Eida and Daemon, using his claw marks to try and figure out exactly how Daemon's reflectability works. And the information that Code gets is actually very interesting to us, the reader. See, because while Daemon is messing with Bug and not looking at Code, Code launches claw marks at Daemon's back. But the claw marks that were going to hit Daemon are reflected back onto Code. Now, rather interestingly, the claw marks do still hit Bug, which shows us that the people that Daemon is in contact with are still affected by attacks that are aimed at Daemon. See, that's important because from this sneak peek that we're getting for chapter 31, it's chapter 32. This entire time I've been saying chapter 31, it's chapter 32. But anyways, the sneak peek that we're getting for chapter 32 is Daemon holding on to Eida. And there is a belief in the Boruto fandom that Daemon's reflectability extends to anybody he's touching, but that is not the case. See, if that was the case, Daemon could just hold on to Eida and Mamushi wouldn't be able to do anything to her, as both her and Daemon would have the reflect ability. But considering the fact that we do see Code's claw marks land on Bug's body while Daemon is holding on to him, tells us that his reflectability does not transfer to those he's in contact with. Well, Nick, what if it's about intent? What if he has to willingly share the reflect with them? I mean, like, maybe. Yeah, that's technically a possibility. We have no evidence to prove that claim, but yeah, I mean, it could be the case. But I very much doubt it. But why is this even a conversational point in the first place? Well, because Daemon's reflectability has a glaring weakness that was introduced to us through the medium of Bug. See, because after Code got his limiters off and was able to surpass Jigen in strength, Bug was trying to pit Code against Daemon, hoping that the two of them would destroy each other and thus Bug would be free from Kara. And thus, in order to give Code a leg up in battle against Daemon, he told Code that Daemon's reflectability only works when his palms are touching somebody else. See, that's the weakness of Daemon's reflectability that no one ever really talks about. Without somebody else to hold on to, Daemon basically doesn't have his reflectability at all. And thus, in a 1v1, unless he's able to grab the person he's fighting with or a hostage, the reflectability is kind of null and void. Now, obviously, in a battle against a perpetual army of Mamushis, there will be plenty of people for Daemon to hold. And this is actually why, outside of the fact that he can't fly, that we see him holding on to Eida in this sneak preview. Now, it's obviously not really the end of the world that his reflectability only works when he's holding on to other people, because Daemon has proved himself to be time and time again maybe the fastest person in the universe. He speed blitzed Limitless Code, he caught Kawaki's chakra rods out of mid-air, and Sarada using your Mangekyo Sharingan cannot track him. He's faster than adult Naruto and Sasuke, he's faster than Limitless Code, and therefore he's probably not only the strongest, but also the fastest person in existence right now, possibly barring Jura. I mean, after all, even after Bug told Code Daemon's weakness, Daemon beat him down with just a couple of strikes, confirmed that while he is stronger than Jigen and therefore should be able to take on any Uchiha or Hokage he wants to, that means nothing when compared to his strength. Naruto fans, I don't know what you want. I'm sorry. But all that is to say that Daemon's reflectability probably won't be able to keep Eida safe. Unless, of course, it can be shared with one other person that he's in contact with. In which case, he could literally just stand inside of a horde of Mamushi, and while they tried to eat Eida, they would just kill themselves. But for the sake of interesting writing, let's assume that he can't do that. And thus, it's going to be up to Daemon using a combination of his massive strength, speed, and reflectability to try and wipe out all of the Mamushi before they can get their grimy little claw hands on his precious sister, which obviously they're going to try to do in chapter 32. Now, the idea from Shikamaru and the rest of Team Boruto is that in chapter 32, after Eida exposes her position, all of the Mamushis will swarm into one area. But when all of these Mamushis swarm to Eida's location, the idea is that one member of Team Boruto will blow them all away with some kind of crazy big attack. But really only two, maybe three members in all of Team Boruto have the ability to pull that off. And those three-ish people are Boruto, Kawaki, and Himawari. See, obviously, if Boruto is given enough time to plant his feet and funnel the Earth's chakra into his system to pull off a gigantic Rasengan Uzuhiko, he could, with limitless power, blow away an entire horde of Mamushis. We've also seen time and time again that Kawaki's able to use some kind of Sero-esque gigantic chakra blast, which he's most famous for using in his battle against Garo, and obviously Himawari has access to Tailed Beast Balls. Tailed Beast Balls that she's already tried to use in combat against Mamushi. However, on account of the fact that when she was trying to use it, she was in a population center, she was chastised by Shikadai. Now, rather interestingly, whoever does take the final shot to wipe out all of the Mamushis greatly changes how Boruto's story will unfurl. And no, for those of you who are wondering, it won't be Daemon who takes out all the Mamushis. See, Daemon, well, untouchable and ridiculously fast, doesn't have an attack that would kill all the Mamushis. Unless, since all the Mamushis are technically the same person, if one has the intent to attack Daemon, that intent to attack is reflected upon all the Mamushis. But that's incredibly unlikely. It would be a ridiculously easy out, because even if the Mamushis understood they shouldn't attack Daemon, the entire idea with revealing Eida's location is that the Mamushis are going to split to the point of stupidity. And therefore, I can almost guarantee you there's going to be a fair amount of Mamushis trying to attack Daemon. So I believe it will most likely come down to either Boruto, Kawaki, or Himawari. And all three of those possibilities are equally interesting. See, let's first talk about Kawaki. See, Two Blue Vortex has been hinting at the fact that Kawaki is aware of the connection between Shikamaru and Boruto. Long before this anti-Mamushi squad was formed, Kawaki was becoming suspicious that Shikamaru and Boruto were working together behind his back. And Kawaki is also obviously aware that Shikamaru and Eida work together rather closely, as Eida's Senrigan has become an incredible reconnaissance tool for the Hokage to access. And while that tool isn't necessarily being used against Kawaki right now, I can absolutely see a future where Kawaki deems Shikamaru as a tainted asset, especially now that it is clearly out in the open that Shikamaru and Boruto are at least friendly with each other. And Kawaki's not the kind of person who would let one of his most powerful pawns go to the opposition. And thus, upon Kawaki coming to the realization that Shikamaru has begun to join Team Boruto, I could see him coming to the somewhat logical conclusion that if he's already lost Shikamaru, it's only a matter of time until he loses Eida. See, because in Kawaki's mind, Eida is a set asset, somebody he can be as mean as he wants to be too, and none of it matters because she's in love with him and therefore she's controllable. However, even though Eida has never expressed really any straightforward romantic intent towards Boruto, it's more like admiration. If there was one person who could date Eida that wasn't named Kawaki, it would be Boruto. And therefore, ironically, from a controlling Eida as an asset standpoint, Boruto is not only Kawaki's biggest competition, but also Kawaki's biggest competition from a potential love interest with Eida perspective. And while I'm aware that Kawaki doesn't care about falling in love with Eida, love in the circumstance of Eida is a tool of control. And therefore, with the assumption that at some point Eida was going to swing over to Team Boruto, I could very much see Kawaki coming to the conclusion that it's better to eliminate her from the chessboard now than to see her swing to the side of the opposition. On top of this, for Kawaki, it could be 2-for-1 shopping. See, obviously, Eida and Daemon are not affected by omnipotence. They know the real truth of the world. They know that Boruto is not a bad person. They know that Kawaki and Boruto swapped places. And more than anything, in Eida's hands is the ability to possibly reverse that omnipotence. See, more so than the fact that if Eida were swung over to Team Boruto, Boruto would have access to the Senrigan. If Eida swung over to Team Boruto, Boruto could have potential access to omnipotence. And while Eida has expressed doubt in her ability to straight up reverse the first omnipotence she fired, Eida's omnipotence inherently acts on the wishes of others. And therefore, if Boruto wished to have his position swapped with that of Kawaki, while it might not be a perfect one-to-one undoing, it still serves as a way to kick Kawaki out of the village. On top of this, it's been established that even if Eida were to die, that omnipotence would not be undone. And therefore, removing her from the game removes any and all possibility of omnipotence being used to undo omnipotence. And the real cherry on top of all of this is that while Daemon is fighting against all of the Mamushi and trying to protect Eida, he'll be the most distracted he's ever been. And as his reflectability only works when he's touching somebody else, Kawaki could take advantage of this moment to blow him away as well. See, because Daemon has no loyalty to Kawaki, and Daemon is way more powerful than Kawaki. Daemon is still probably the most powerful person in the Boruto universe with the sole exception of Jura. And therefore, if it comes down to it and Kawaki ever has to 1v1 Daemon, he'll probably lose. Well, on top of this, if he intends to destroy Eida, he better destroy Daemon as well. Because if the blast fired by anybody also kills Eida, but it doesn't kill Daemon, well, you better start praying to whatever god you believe in. And therefore, if it comes down to Kawaki to destroy Mamushi with his gigantic chakra blast, I believe either Eida, Daemon, or both of them will be caught up in said blast. And most likely, Kawaki will get this idea by watching Mamushi land a blow on Daemon, possibly by accident. See, yes, we know that Bug understood Daemon's weakness, which is that he needs to be touching somebody for his reflectability to work. But we have really no reason to believe that Kawaki knows it. But since it's kind of being established in the beginning of the chapter that Mamushi is some of Bug's memories, it also stands to reason that Mamushi may remember Daemon's weakness. And therefore Kawaki, while watching the fight unfold between Mamushi and Daemon, will realize that the only way that Daemon is able to reflect somebody's attacks is while he's touching somebody else, which will give Kawaki a hypothetical window to blow him away. However, Kawaki taking the final shot is kind of a worst case scenario. I mean, it's probably the best case scenario from the plot perspective, but for the interests of Konoha, it is definitely the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is Boruto taking the final shot. See, because if Boruto is taking the final shot, he'll almost definitely try to make a way that both Daemon and Eida do not get caught up in the blast. I mean, Boruto's entire platform in Two Blue Vortex has been that nobody needs to die in order for us to defeat the Shinju, which is flown in direct opposition of basically everything that Kashin Koji's been planning. And while some could argue that Boruto has every right to destroy Eida after what she did to him, it's important to note that Eida did not know the wish she was making a reality, and also felt a pretty immense amount of guilt about the wish she made reality. So much so that immediately after firing Omnipotence, she went to Boruto using her Senrigan and told him that no matter what anybody tried to do to her or asked of her, so long as Boruto stayed away from Konoha, she wouldn't use her Senrigan to track him down. See, Eida has always treated Boruto with an immense amount of respect. Respect that Boruto has showed in kind to her. On top of this, Boruto should be fully aware that Eida is very close friends with both Sarada and Sumire, who both mean a lot to Boruto. And therefore, kind of like how Boruto intervened in the battle against Matsuri in order to ensure that Konohamaru wouldn't die, I'd assume that Boruto would expend a fair amount of effort to ensure that neither Eida or Daemon died. Which brings us to our third and possibly most interesting outcome, which is that Himawari will be the person responsible for taking the final shot. And here's the thing, there's already been a fair amount of foreshadowing that this is the outcome that we're going to get. See, because, like I said earlier, Himawari has already been chastised by Shikadai for her attempt to use a tailed beast ball inside of Konoha against the Mamushi. Because even though it's been established that tailed beast balls can be used as sniper shots by people like Jura, seemingly that's not the case for Himawari. Her tailed beast balls appear to be very similar to the tailed beast balls of old. Ridiculously heavy balls of positive and negative chakra that explode with force unseen in any other jutsu. And therefore, if it really came down to it, and one person had to be trusted to wipe out as many Mamushi as possible, Himawari is kind of the most logical choice, especially when considering the fact that already over the course of Mamushi's invasion, we've established that Himawari's tailed beast balls should not be used within the confines of Konoha. This fight will not be within the confines of Konoha because they are too destructive, and too destructive is absolutely the kind of jutsu you need to wipe out a swarming mass of Shinju. But what happens when you take this combination of recklessness and power? Well, while you might destroy all of the Mamushi, you also probably destroy who's at the center of those swarming Mamushis, like Eida. And here's the thing, Himawari being the person to accidentally kill Eida makes a ton of sense. One, because it solidifies the idea of her recklessness, it shows how much she still needs to train, and two, because it makes her a clear-cut rival to Daemon. See, in chapter 75, after Kurama started to recenter inside of Himawari, while people like Naruto and Sasuke were inside the village, Daemon established that he wanted to fight Himawari and Himawari alone. Now, we've been waiting for that seed that was planted over 3 years ago to grow for a while now. But the thing is, Daemon and Himawari have had no reason to fight. However, in the hypothetical circumstance where Himawari destroys Eida, yeah, you bet your bottom dollar they have reason to fight. And thus, even though Mamushi has been eliminated, the next key antagonist can become Daemon, which would not only serve as an incredible platform for Himawari to grow as a Jinchuriki, but would also serve as a way to pay off a fight that was hinted at in part 1 of Boruto. And thus, if I had to assume who the final shot will come down to, I'd say it's either going to be Kawaki or Himawari. But Nick, why are you so hell-bent on the idea of Eida, or possibly Eida, and Daemon's deaths? Well, it's not like I want them dead, I don't, but I believe that at least Eida's character arc is over. See, after Eida established to both Sarada and Sumire that she loves them, I believe she kind of signed her own death accord. She wished to be loved for who she is, and thus she manifested her charm Shinjutsu. But because her charm Shinjutsu made everybody who ever saw her fall head over heels in love with her immediately, she began to seek genuine connection. And the only people that she believed she could ever have a genuine connection with were those who were unaffected by her omnipotence, and thus Boruto and Kawaki came onto the scene. But she chose Kawaki, and Kawaki treated her like dirt, and thus she couldn't find her true connection. However, that was until it was established that both Sarada and Sumire were unaffected by her charm Shinjutsu, and therefore she was able to find her genuine connection outside of the boundary of traditional love with her two female best friends, which was surprisingly progressive writing from Ikimoto. However, because she's now found love with her friends, she's completed her character arc, and thus, from a plot perspective, most useful thing that she can do is to die to push Sarada and Sumire to higher highs. But Nick, you ask, what about her Senrigan? Well, we've been specifically not using her Senrigan over the course of Two Blue Vortex because she was afraid that Mamushi would be able to peer back at her to get us used to the idea of her Senrigan ability not really being around. And now that Mamushi is going to be gone at the end of this arc, Eida's Senrigan would be massively useful for tracking down both Jura and Hidari. I don't know if Ikimoto wants Team Boruto to have that kind of advantage. Not to mention the sheer existence of Daemon will always present another option to fight against the endgame bosses. However, like we earlier stated, Daemon's character arc is not over yet. He wants to fight Himawari, and if I know anything about anime and manga, he's gonna get that chance. And considering the fact that a weaker version of Himawari than we're currently seeing right now was able to bang with Jura for at least a little bit, a battle between a Himawari who's been training with Kurama and Daemon could be really interesting. And like I stated earlier, would serve as an incredible platform for Himawari to deepen her connection to Kurama and truly begin to figure out who she is as a Jinchuriki. And the beauty of the idea of either Kawaki or Himawari Himawari taking this final shot is that it would cement home the idea that the only love that Eida ever needed came from Sarada and Sumire, which would be surprisingly woke messaging from the combined forces of Kishimoto and Ikimoto. But of course, after all, there is the chance that Boruto does take the final shot, and that Eida does get caught up in that blast. However, if that is the case, it will be of her own volition, as Boruto can truly never have blood on his hands. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. What do you believe is going to happen in chapter 32? Do you think that Eida will die, or will she see the end of this story? Let me know in the comments below, and while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go be unpaid labor for my fiance, but she's promised me lunch.